My sister got the house. Then the envelope arrived with my name on it. My name is Zara Ahmed. I'm 30 years old. The morning after my grandmother's funeral, I woke up in her house for the last time. I knew it was the last time because my sister Layla had told me, 2 days earlier, that she was the primary heir to the property. That our grandmother had discussed it with her. That the house would be hers and I was welcome to take whatever personal belongings I had there before the transfer was finalized. I lay in the small bedroom at the back of the house, the one that had been mine every summer growing up, the one with a window that faced east and let in the morning light before anything else in the house was awake. And I looked at the ceiling, and I felt the particular feeling of a story ending that you had not realized was still ongoing until the moment it stopped. Then I got up, made tea in the kitchen where my grandmother had made tea every morning for 51 years, sat at her table, looked out her window at her garden, which was still producing tomatoes in late September because she had planted a variety specifically chosen for its late-season resilience. I did not feel angry. I want to tell you that because I think it is important to the story. I did not feel angry. I felt something more complicated, a kind of grief that had two components. The grief for my grandmother, which was real and deep and appropriate. And underneath it, a quieter grief for something I had not been told I was allowed to want. 3 days after that morning, a letter arrived at the address I had given as my temporary contact during the estate processing. A letter in an envelope with my name on it in handwriting I recognized immediately. My grandmother's handwriting. What was in that letter is the reason I am here telling you this story. And what it set in motion over the following 6 months is the reason this story has an ending that is different from the one I thought it had in that bedroom on that September morning. If you've ever been handed a lesser portion by someone who had the authority to determine the portions, stay with me. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. My grandmother, Fatima Rahimi, was born in Tehran in 1942. She came to the United States in 1978, 1 year before the revolution that would have made her departure considerably more complicated. She came with my grandfather, Dariush, and their 2 children. My mother Sanaa, who was 9, and my uncle Cameron, who was 6. She had been a schoolteacher in Tehran. In the United States, that credential did not transfer directly, and so she did what many immigrants do. She worked in the available positions while rebuilding. She worked in a textile factory for 4 years. She worked as a teacher's aide at an elementary school for 7 years while completing the coursework she needed for her American credential. She became a full teacher at the age of 50 and taught 4th grade for 14 years before retiring. She was small, precise, and had the particular quality of someone who has survived significant disruption and has organized the rest of her life around the prevention of similar disruption. She kept records of everything. She had files for her utility bills going back to 1984. She knew the interest rate on every account she had ever held. She had a handwritten ledger of every significant financial decision she and my grandfather had made together, and after he died in 2006, she continued the ledger alone. She was also funny. I want to say that because the serious facts of a person's life can make them sound stern, and she was not stern. She was dry and quick, and could deflate a pompous person with a single quiet sentence in a way that made everyone in the room laugh except the pompous person, who usually took a moment to realize what had happened. I spent every summer of my childhood at her house. My parents worked long hours. My father ran a small import business, my mother was a pharmacist, and the summer arrangement that developed when I was 5 or 6 was that my sister Layla and I went to stay with our grandmother in Sacramento while our parents worked. Layla is 6 years older than me. She aged out of the summer arrangement earlier. By the time I was 12, she was 18 and had summer jobs and her own social life and came to Sacramento only briefly. By the time I was 15, I was making the trip alone. I loved it. Completely. Not in the nostalgic way of someone who has idealized their grandmother's house in retrospect, but in the immediate way of someone who was genuinely happy in that specific place. We read together. We cooked together. We went to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings and she let me pick what we would make for the week based on what looked good. We watched films. She had a collection of Iranian cinema that she was methodically working through with me, explaining context that I did not have and that she considered essential for understanding where her stories came from. She talked to me like I was a person with a mind that was worth engaging. This sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. My grandfather died when I was 16. I was in Sacramento that summer and I was with her when it happened, not at the exact moment, but in the hours before and after. He had been ill for several months. His death was not unexpected, which did not make it less devastating. In the weeks after he died, I stayed. School was starting in 2 weeks, but my parents agreed I should stay. My grandmother and I moved through that house together in the way of two people processing the same loss from different angles. We did not always talk about him directly. Sometimes we just cooked and ate and sat in the garden and let the silence be what it needed to be. I went home in September. I called her every week from that point on. The summer arrangement continued for 2 more years, though it was different. I was older, I had more of my own life, and we were also navigating a new version of the house, one that had my grandfather's absence as a permanent feature of its landscape. Then I went to university. And the summers changed. I was studying architecture at a school in Los Angeles. The program was demanding, and the summers became the time I needed to do internships and build the professional foundation that the degree required. I came to Sacramento when I could, spring breaks, some weeks in December, the occasional long weekend. The calls continued. Every week, without fail. We talked about everything. My grandmother had opinions about architecture that she had developed from a lifetime of paying close attention to the built environment, and from a specific aesthetic sensibility that she had carried with her from Iran and that inflected everything she noticed about spaces. She had never formally studied the discipline, but she understood it in the way of someone who has been thinking carefully about buildings for a long time without needing credentials to do so. I showed her things I was working on. Not because I needed her professional feedback, she was not an architect, but because her feedback was useful in a different way. She responded to design the way a thoughtful person who lives in the world responds to design. She told me when something felt cold. She told me when something felt like it was trying too hard. She told me once, looking at a housing project I had been assigned, that it had the quality of a building designed for photographs rather than for people, and that observation was one of the truest things anyone said to me in my 4 years of school. I graduated in 2017. I took a position at a firm in Portland. I came to Sacramento for Christmas that year and the year after, and we talked every week, and the life I was building felt connected to her in a way that was hard to articulate but that I understood as real. My sister Layla lived in Sacramento. She had stayed, had built her life there, was close geographically to my grandmother in the way that I was not. She managed practical matters, drove my grandmother to appointments, helped with household tasks that became harder as my grandmother aged, was present in the immediate, physical way that I could not be from Portland. I want to acknowledge that clearly because I think it matters. Layla's presence was real and was valuable and involved real effort. I was not there in the same way. What I was not aware of, during those years, was that Layla and my grandmother had been having conversations about the house that I was not part of. Not sinister conversations, necessarily. Conversations of the kind that happen naturally when one person is physically present and managing the practical realities of another person's aging, and the other person is far away and present primarily by phone. Those conversations had apparently produced an understanding, on Layla's part, that the house would come to her. Whether my grandmother had intended this understanding to be what Layla took it to be is something I still do not know with complete certainty. What I know is what came after. My grandmother's health began declining seriously in the fall of 2021. She had been managing well. Her mind was as sharp as it had ever been, and the physical limitations of her age had not substantially affected her daily life. Then she had a cardiac event that required hospitalization and that revealed a heart condition that had apparently been developing for some time without producing symptoms sufficient to prompt investigation. She was hospitalized for 11 days. I flew to Sacramento on day 3 and stayed for a week, then returned to Portland because I had project deadlines I could not extend. I flew back once more during the recovery period. I spoke to her every day. Layla was there consistently. She coordinated with the medical team, managed the discharge planning, arranged the in-home support that the post-hospitalization period required. She was, in the practical sense, the person who held things together during those months. I want to say again, clearly, this was real work. It cost Layla time and energy and presence that I was not able to provide. I do not diminish it. What I noticed, during my visits in that period, was a shift in how certain conversations happened. When I raised questions about my grandmother's long-term care preferences, about the plans she had made for the house and the estate, Layla would often redirect. Not aggressively. Smoothly, in the way of someone who has decided these are their conversations to manage and is gently steering others away from them. My grandmother was present in these conversations. She participated. She did not seem distressed. But she also seemed, in a way I could not quite name, more willing to defer than she had been before. The hospitalization had done something to her confidence about her own future, which is understandable. When you have had a cardiac event, the horizon looks different. I talked to her alone, when I could. On a Sunday afternoon in January 2022, sitting in her garden in the winter sun, I asked her directly about the house. "What do you want to happen with the house, Maman Bozorg?" I asked, using the Farsi I had grown up speaking with her in private. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want it to stay in the family." "But who in the family?" I asked. She looked at the garden. At the tomato plants she would replant in the spring, the roses along the south fence that she had been tending for 30 years. "I have thought about this very carefully," she said. "I have made arrangements." I asked what she meant. She touched my hand. "You will understand when the time comes," she said. "I want you to trust that I have thought about it." I told her I trusted her. I meant it. She died in September 2022, not from the cardiac condition, or not directly. She fell in August and the complications from the fall were more than her heart could manage. She died in the house on a Friday morning. Layla was there. I flew in that afternoon. The 3 days between her death and the funeral were the 3 days in which Layla told me about the house. On the first day, she told me that our grandmother had spoken to her about her wishes. That the house was to be Layla's. That this was what our grandmother had wanted. On the second day, she told me that she had spoken with the estate attorney and that the will was being processed. That things were clear. On the third day, the day before the funeral, she told me that I should take whatever I wanted from the house before the transfer was finalized. I did not argue with her. I did not demand to see the will. I did not know exactly what I felt, but I knew that the 3 days around a funeral are not the 3 days in which to have that conversation. I nodded. I said I would go through my things. After the funeral, I stayed one more night. That last morning in the east bedroom. The tea at her table. The garden with the late tomatoes. Then I flew home to Portland. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, 9 days after the funeral. I had given the estate attorney's office my Portland address as a contact during the processing period, at Layla's suggestion, since she was coordinating the local administrative matters. The letter was not from the attorney's office. It was in a plain white envelope with my grandmother's handwriting. I stood in the hallway of my apartment and looked at that handwriting for a moment before I opened it. Inside were 2 items. A handwritten letter, 4 pages in my grandmother's precise script, the same handwriting she had used in the notes she tucked into books she sent me, the same handwriting from her ledgers, and a smaller envelope, sealed, with the name of her attorney printed on the outside. I read the letter first. She wrote that she had been thinking about what she wanted to do with the house for several years, and that she had found herself in a complicated position. She loved Layla. She was grateful for what Layla had done in the years of her increasing age. She wanted Layla to have recognition for that. But she also wrote that she had been watching me from a different kind of distance. That the calls every week had not been nothing to her. They had been a form of presence that she had needed and valued, and that she was aware not everyone who lives far away maintains. She wrote that she understood architecture, a little, because I had been teaching her to understand it for years through our conversations, and that she thought this was one of the things that happened when two people paid consistent attention to each other across distance. She wrote that she had made a decision that she knew would be complicated for the family. She had thought about it for a long time. She had worked with her attorney to put it into a form that was clear and legally sound. Then she wrote the specific thing that she wanted me to understand before I opened the attorney's envelope. Zara, the house is not only a house. It is also the thing I built with your grandfather. It is 51 years of mornings in that kitchen and evenings in that garden. When I think about where it should go, I do not only think about who needs it. I think about who understands what it is. You have understood what it is since you were small. You have understood what it means to build something slowly and to value what the slowness produces. I want you to have it because I believe you will understand it the right way. And I want you to know that this is not a statement about Layla. It is a statement about you. I sat down on my hallway floor. I read the letter twice more. Then I opened the sealed envelope. Inside the attorney's envelope was a document. A formal document, prepared and signed, that named me, Zara Ahmed, as the beneficiary of the property at the Sacramento address. Specifically, not the general estate. The house itself, designated separately, to me. My grandmother had not left the house to the general estate. She had structured the bequest as a specific devise, a direct designation to a named person, separate from the residuary estate. This was a legal distinction that her attorney had apparently helped her understand and implement. The document was dated 14 months before her death. 14 months before Layla told me the house was hers. I sat with this information for a long time. The first call I made was to the attorney whose name was on the envelope. His name was Robert Kessler. I reached his office the following morning. He knew who I was. He had been expecting me to call, he said, though not necessarily this quickly. He confirmed what the document said. The house was designated to me. This designation had been part of my grandmother's estate planning since the previous year. The will, which had been filed with the court as part of the standard probate process, reflected this. "Has my sister seen the will?" I asked. "The will has been filed," he said carefully. "Your sister has been in contact with this office. I am not able to tell you specifically what she has been told or what she knows." I understood what he was not saying. "Is the will clear?" I asked. "It is completely clear," he said. "Your grandmother was thorough. She was one of the most thorough clients I have worked with." I thanked him. I told him I would be in touch. Then I sat in my apartment in Portland and thought about what I wanted to do. I want to tell you about that period of thinking because I believe it is the most important part of the story. I had documentation. I had a will. I had a letter from my grandmother explaining her reasoning in her own words. I had an attorney who confirmed the legal situation was clear. By any standard measure, I had what I needed to act. What I was thinking about was not whether I had the right to the house. I was thinking about what acting on that right would cost and what it would produce, and whether those things were proportionate. My sister Layla had believed the house was hers. She had said so 3 times in the days after our grandmother's death. She had said it with the confidence of someone who was not performing confidence but actually felt it, who had had conversations that had left her with a genuine impression. I did not know exactly how those conversations had gone. I could imagine several versions, some of which were benign. My grandmother had spoken loosely about the future of the house without the clarity she had built into the legal documents, and Layla had drawn a reasonable conclusion from an ambiguous conversation. And I could imagine less benign versions, in which Layla had guided those conversations in directions that produced the impression she wanted. I did not know which version was true. I still do not know with certainty. What I knew was that my grandmother had put her intentions in writing, clearly, with an attorney, 14 months before her death. That is a considered decision. That is not someone who spoke loosely and was misunderstood. That is someone who knew what she wanted and made sure there was a record of it. I called a friend from law school who had gone into estate law. Her name was Caroline. I asked her to help me think through the situation. She listened to the full account. Then she said, "The legal situation is clear. The question is how you want to handle telling your sister." "I know," I said. "That's the question I'm sitting with. Do you want advice, or do you want me to listen?" "Both," I said. She gave me the advice first. She said the cleanest approach was a direct conversation with Layla, with the will and the letter, before involving attorneys on both sides. That this gave Layla the opportunity to respond to the information in a private context rather than through formal legal channels. That if Layla accepted the situation, which, given the legal clarity, she would ultimately need to do, a private conversation would preserve more of the relationship than a process that required attorneys on both sides. She also said, if Layla contests it, you have an extremely strong position. But that process is long and expensive and emotionally costly, and given that the will is clear, it would ultimately end the same way regardless of what the process cost you both to get there. I said I understood. Then she listened. I talked for about 40 minutes. About my grandmother. About the summers. About the east bedroom, and the garden, and the late tomatoes, and the 51 years of mornings in that kitchen. About what it meant to me that she had done this, had written that letter and sealed it and sent it, in the months before she died. "She really knew you," Caroline said when I finished. "Yes," I said. "She did." I called Layla on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after the letter arrived. I had thought about the timing carefully. Not a weekday, that felt too transactional. Not immediately. I needed to have my own understanding settled before I could have the conversation clearly. 3 weeks felt right. Layla answered on the second ring. She sounded the way she had sounded since the funeral. Tired, a little flat, the specific exhaustion of someone who has been managing a loss while also managing the practical aftermath of a loss. I told her I had received a letter. I told her it was from our grandmother, sent through the attorney. I told her it contained a document. She was quiet. "What kind of document?" she asked. I told her. Clearly, without softening, but also without sharpness. The house had been designated to me in the will. The designation was specific and separate from the general estate. The will had been filed and was clear. A longer silence. "She told me it was mine," Layla said finally. "What exactly did she say?" I asked. Another pause. "She said the house would stay in the family. She said I would be taken care of. She said," Layla stopped. "She said the house would be there for me." I thought about that. "Layla," I said, "I think those things might both be true. The house being mine does not mean you are not taken care of. And it being mine does not mean the conversations you had with her were lies. I think she may have been trying to reassure you without being specific about the will, and the will says what it says." "You're saying she misled me." "I'm saying I don't know exactly what she said or how you understood it. And I'm saying the will is what the will is." A long silence. I let it sit. "I need to see it," Layla said. "Of course," I said. "I'll send you copies of everything." I sent them that evening. The will. The letter. The attorney's contact information. The weeks that followed were the hardest of the process. Not because Layla contested the will legally, she did not, ultimately. Her own attorney, after reviewing the documents, told her the same thing Caroline had told me. The will was clear. The designation was valid. My grandmother had been legally competent at the time of execution, documented by the attorney. There was no meaningful basis for a contest. What was hard was the silence between us while Layla processed this. We did not speak for 6 weeks. I sent occasional short messages, not about the estate, just small things, checking in. She replied briefly, functionally. We were both in the same position we had been in before. Except now there was this thing between us that had not been there before. In the 7th week, she called me. "I talked to Robert Kessler," she said. Robert was the attorney. He showed me the file. He showed me when she came in, what she said when she was there. Okay, I said. She came in alone, Layla said. I didn't know she went. She arranged the whole thing without telling me. Yes, I said. She planned this, Layla said. She made a plan and she kept it to herself and she executed it. She did, I said. That's who she was. A pause. She left me money, Layla said. From the general estate. And the furnishings. And her jewelry. She was specific about what she left me too. I know, I said. She was specific about everything. She didn't leave me nothing, Layla said. It sounded like she was working something out while she said it. No, I said. She didn't. She just didn't leave me the house. No, I said. She left that to me. Another pause. Longer. Why? Layla asked. Not challenging. Genuinely asking. I told her about the letter. Not the parts that were private between me and my grandmother. But the substance, that our grandmother had explained her reasoning, that the reasoning had to do with understanding what the house meant and not just needing it, that she had thought about it for a long time. Did she explain why she didn't tell me herself? Layla asked. No, I said. She didn't explain that. I have thought about this question since. I think my grandmother knew that telling Layla directly, having that conversation before she died, would have produced a conflict she did not have the energy to manage in her final months. I think she chose to let the legal documents do the work after she was gone because it was cleaner, because it removed the possibility of being argued out of a decision she had made carefully. I think she trusted that both Layla and I would ultimately accept what the documents said, because both of us had learned, from her, to trust the written record. She was right. We did. I moved into the house in March 2023. I had been back and forth between Portland and Sacramento several times during the estate processing, and by December I had accepted a position at a firm in Sacramento, a real offer that I had been weighing for other reasons and that the house made an easier decision. I gave notice in Portland, packed, and moved. The east bedroom is my office now. The window still faces east and the morning light still comes in first. The garden needed attention. I have been giving it attention. The tomatoes are back, the same late-season variety she had chosen for their resilience. I looked up the name of the variety in the planting records she kept in a folder in the kitchen drawer. Of course she kept planting records, and ordered the same seeds. The kitchen is the kitchen I have known since I was 5 years old. I have changed nothing in it. I am aware that I will need to change things eventually as equipment ages, and I will change them then. But right now, I want to be in the kitchen she left. I found her ledger in the filing cabinet. It runs from 1984 to 3 weeks before she died. Every significant financial decision, in her handwriting, in chronological order. I have read the whole thing. It is a document of a life built with discipline and intention and a specific understanding of what money is and what it is for. The last entry is dated August 2022, 3 weeks before she fell. It is a note about the garden, not a financial entry but a record she had apparently decided belonged in the ledger. It says, planted the late tomatoes on the south side. Should last through October. Good year for them. That is the last thing she wrote in the ledger. A note about tomatoes that would outlast her. I found it in October, when they were still producing. I sat in the garden and read that entry and cried in a way I had not let myself cry since the funeral. Then I went inside and made tea and sat at her table and looked out her window. And I understood, for the first time fully, what she had meant when she wrote that she wanted to leave the house to someone who understood what it was. Layla and I are finding our way. It is not simple and it is not fast. There is still something between us, not hostility, but the specific self-consciousness of two people who know that what they went through tested something and are not yet certain of the test's results. She came for dinner in April. First time in the house since I had moved in. She walked through the rooms quietly, not commenting on what had changed and not commenting on what hadn't. We ate in the kitchen. We talked about our grandmother, which we had not done much of since the funeral. We told the same stories and we did not overlap as much as I expected. She had her stories and I had mine, and some of them featured the same person in different ways. At the end of the evening, she stood at the kitchen door before leaving and looked around at the kitchen for a moment. "It still smells like her," she said. "I know," I said. "I hope it always does." She left. I closed the door and stood in the kitchen for a while. That is where things are. That is as accurate a description as I can give of where things are. There are things I have learned from this that I think are worth saying plainly. My grandmother was 79 years old when she sat down with her attorney to revise her estate plan. She was in good health at that point. The cardiac event had not yet happened. She made a deliberate decision, in full possession of her faculties, and she did it quietly and carefully and with the specific thoroughness that characterized everything she did. She did not tell Layla what she was doing. She did not tell me either. She made her plan, executed it through proper legal channels, and prepared the letter that would explain it after she was gone. She trusted that the documents would hold and that we would ultimately respect what they said. I think about this often. About the deliberateness of it. About what it takes to make a significant decision about your estate without telling the people affected by it, in order to prevent that decision from being argued about while you are still alive to be argued at. She protected her own intention. She knew it was unconventional. She knew it would cause difficulty. She did it anyway, and she put the reasons in writing, and she trusted the process. The lesson I take from this is not about estate planning, though estate planning is part of it. The lesson is about the specific kind of care that goes into a decision that you know will outlast you. My grandmother was thinking about what would happen after she was gone, and she was thinking about it with the same precision she applied to her planting records and her financial ledger. She wanted the house to go to the right person. She figured out how to make that happen. She did the work. If you have property or assets that you want to go to a specific person for specific reasons, write it down. Have it properly documented. Tell an attorney what you mean and make sure the attorney captures it in a form that will hold. And then, if you can, write the letter that explains why. Because the legal document tells people what you decided, but the letter tells them what you were thinking when you decided it. Both matter. But the letter is the one they will read sitting on a hallway floor. My name is Zara Ahmed. I am 30 years old. I grew up spending summers in Sacramento in my grandmother's house. I went far away and called every week for 15 years. She left me a letter in her handwriting, and a house in her will, and a ledger that ends with a note about tomatoes that outlasted her. I live in the east bedroom. My office faces east and the morning light comes in first. The tomatoes are back in the garden. Some things you keep. Some things keep you.